Welcome back to WCB Jazz Vinyl. The topic for today is my top 5 favorite tone poets released in the 2025 calendar thus far. So we're basically just over the 6 month mark, and I thought I'd take a look back and look at all of the releases that have been put out in the Tone Poet series and sort of prioritize them. Because listen, there was a lot of controversy last year with the announcement of the Tone Poet Society and the kind of like benefiting those customers who were buying them all. So I thought I'd give folks at least my perspective on which are the titles that I think that if you didn't do that, if you didn't get them all, and maybe you're trying to be a little bit choosier, which are the ones to look out to. So that's what we're about to get into. As always, before we dive in, go ahead and hit like. Please subscribe to my channel, and of course, you can follow me on Instagram. I'm at what_can_brown. All right, so one quick plug, and that is that one of my most recent videos is part one of an interview with George Claben, who is not only the founder of Resonance Records, he's also the engineer for just a ton of releases across all labels, from Prestige to Strata East to Muse to Cobblestone to Three Blind Mice, like so many different labels. He had his own studio, recorded a ton of just classic sessions, and I had the opportunity to interview him across 3 parts. I've only put out the first part. I have part 2 and 3 ready to go. I'm just kind of waiting for just kind of ironing out some of the editing details. Expect to post those very soon. So go back after this video and definitely check that out, because it is a fascinating discussion, and it will continue to be fascinating through parts 2 and 3. So to the topic at hand, Blue Note and the Tone Poet series. Um, so I just thought that this would be kind of an opportune time, right? So we're in July, we've had the 6 months. Not only were there the standard releases, 2 releases per month, we also have the 2 quarterly sort of exclusive releases that were only available to Tone Poet Society members. And then there was that kind of surprise release, that which was the Kenny Burrell that they made like a triple disc of, which wasn't originally in the calendar. And so I just thought it'd be a good time, like I said up front, to kind of look back and make a statement, I guess, on which are the ones that I think are the best ones of the year so far. And who knows, maybe I'll do another one at the end of this calendar year as well, to sort of sum up the entire series, because I was really excited about 2025, and I know that a lot of others were as well, as far as that release calendar. So keep in mind, and I said this up front at the beginning of the year, I did not subscribe to an annual membership. I subscribed to a quarterly membership. And that continues to be the case, which means that I haven't exactly been efficient with my money, because I just keep renewing the quarterly subscription, because I keep wanting so many of the titles in the calendar, and I wanted access to the exclusives. I'm not going to lie. And so, I'm in a situation where I do have everything. And I am not, and I've said this before, I've not been a Tone Poet completist otherwise in any of the prior years. I've sort of carefully chosen which ones I wanted, based on typically them not being released originally back in the 50s, 60s, or 70s. So I was prioritizing those that had been shelved sessions. Those are the only ones I got. So this has been a little bit different, where I've actually been able to listen to and absorb all of the releases. So that's kind of, I guess, the perspective that I'm going to bring. So just as a point of reference, the 2025 calendar was first announced on November 12th, 2024, and at the same time they announced the Tone Poet Society, which caused some controversy. And I made a prior video on this. Part of the controversy was that it was being shut out for international buyers. Part of that has been resolved with, I believe, a solution, at least for some folks in Europe, to be able to participate and purchase some of these titles, especially those exclusive titles. And I think, that probably that was part of the controversy, and the other part, the international aspect, and the other part was certainly the exclusive titles that they'd only be available to members. And we've seen the impact of that now, right? So Walter Davis's Cup was the very first exclusive release being made only available to members of the Tone Poet Society. And since then, it's sold for as much as $200 on Discogs, more on eBay, and there's actually just a single copy right now that's available for sale on Discogs for $220. The next one, which was put out in that exclusive kind of quarterly release, was Lou Donaldson's Here 'Tis, which, I don't care what some people have said. It is an amazing album, and the Tone Poet version certainly sounds amazing, but it is also one that is crept up there in price simply because it's not available. In fact, there's no copies currently on Discogs for purchase. Um, so what I wanted to do though with my top five, and I'm about to get into it, and we're going to do it rapid fire, so don't worry. Um, what I wanted to get into though is my top five, and I'm actually going to leave out those exclusives from my ranking. And I think that that's only fair because, um, if you didn't sign up for a membership, it isn't fair for me to tell you how to go and like pick and choose which titles that you should go after if two of them are just not going to be available. So the scope that I have here is 15 total releases. So to recap, two per month from January through June. There was also two exclusives, and then there was that surprise Kenny Burrell for a total of 15. Of the 15, let's see, three were on Pacific Jazz, one was on Capitol originally. I'm talking about the labels they were originally put out on. So three on Pacific Jazz, one on Capitol, one on Intro Records, and the remainder on Blue Note. So again, we have 15. I'm gonna toss out those exclusives. Although I will say that both Davis Cup and Here 'Tis are phenomenal records, and I'd have a hard time not squeezing them in, if not one, or if not both, at least one of them into my top favorites of the year. But for the sake of sort of fairness, I'm gonna leave them out. All right, so these are in no particular order, but the first one we're going to discuss is Art Pepper's Modern Art, originally put out on Intro Records. So this was originally put out in 1957, has a great lineup, includes Ben Tucker, Russ Freeman, and Chuck Flores. So a little bit unusual for Blue Note to release albums that were not in the Blue Note catalog for the Tone Poet series, but again, as I mentioned up front, there are a bunch for 2025, and some of them are really stellar, and this Art Pepper release is one of them. So this happens to be a quartet album, as I alluded to when I talked about the lineup. So one horn plus rhythm section. And what I found with this particular release is that it results in a very stark and just really excellent recording. So because it's just the one horn against the rhythm section, as well as the fact that the opener, which is titled Blues In, actually starts with just Art Pepper and Ben Tucker on bass, and it's just really atmospheric and really cool. And I think that cool is probably the operative word here because there definitely is a cool jazz kind of West Coast element to this album, and I think it works really well for the Blue Note format. So Blues In is just one of those tracks where I think you really appreciate how dead silent that Blue Note and sort of the Tone Poet series is able to present some of these records. They really take advantage of silence, I think, really, really well. And that's especially true for this album because the originals just had so much noise, both a product of finding an original that's in decent shape, as well as the fact that originals had some noise. And then the very first reissue, which was on Score Records, was pressed on recycled vinyl, which had a very loud hiss. So, really difficult to find a version of this that is so beautiful and so quiet as this album is. And so for me to be able to hear this extraordinarily rare album, I mean, you'd have to spend $1,000, more than $1,000 to buy this in its original form. To be able to hear this in such a nice presentation, I think is fantastic. And it's one of the reasons why it made my top five. All right, so I am starting with the two that weren't originally put out on Blue Note, but the next one is Serge Chaloff's Blue Serge or Serge. So this one thing I didn't mention, or maybe I did. The Art Pepper was recorded in mono because that's just how it was recorded. This one was recorded in mono as well. So know that. This was originally recorded though in 1956 for Capitol Records. And similar to the Art Pepper, I found this one really dynamic. So the leader here is a baritone sax player, and I think the baritone in the right hands can be a very dynamic instrument. And Serge plays sort of the very low register as well as the very high register on this album, and I think he does a beautiful job with it. This is also a very stark album with just the one horn, which makes the depth I think that the baritone brings just really sort of like extra punchy. The lineup on this is killer. So you have Sonny Clark, a little bit of an early appearance for him. You also have Joe Jones on drums. You have Leroy Vinegar on bass. And what I would say about this in terms of the content is that it combines some really hard charging tracks, like the track The Goof and I, with some medium tempo pieces as well. So I think it kind of it spans a little bit of a gamut in terms of the vibe, but there's great solos, there's great energy, and it's one of those albums I think especially that you can just put on with maybe you have company over who doesn't necessarily really appreciate jazz and they're going to be impressed by this as well. It's not a statement about the whether this is a good performance or whether it's not complex. It's simply that it's simply again I think an example of really great sort of more cool jazz and style that that I think appeals to everyone. And this is such a fantastic presentation of yet again a very rare record. All right, so third up is Hank Mobley, third season. So this was originally put out in the LT series in about 1980, I think, but this was one of those titles that was shelved. So it was originally recorded in 1967, but didn't see the light of day until 1980 in that LT series. So the lineup on this album includes Lee Morgan, Cedar Walton, Sonny Greenwich, Billy Higgins, Walter Booker, and James Spaulding. What I would say about this, especially in contrast to the other two, is obviously this has a larger format to it and it has a very post-bop feel to it as well. As far as the content, 5 tracks were written by Hank Mobley, 1 was by Lee Morgan, so I think this makes this particular album a little bit more of a sort of personal statement by Hank Mobley, which makes it ever the more tragic that it wasn't originally put out when he was still around. One of the highlights, I think, is actually the opener called an aperitif. Really, really nice. I don't know, just a great example, I think, of that post-bop vibe that has great solos from all present. All of the tracks on this album are 5 minutes or more, so it feels a little bit more introspective. There isn't any of those sort of boogaloo kind of commercial things that that sort of crowd any of the content here. And what I would say about this album is that it feels to me like it's one of those more sort of forward-looking late 60s sessions that you sometimes get with Blue Note, especially with Lee Morgan's releases as well as Wayne Shorter's. Obviously, you have a killer lineup on here as well. And I think this easily sounds like something that should have been released and may have been, I think, if Hank Mobley was maybe a little bit better of a seller at that time. All right, next one up is Horace Parlan's Up and Down. So this was originally recorded in 1963. Another killer lineup. You have George Tucker, Al Harewood, Grant Green, and Booker Ervin joining Horace Parlan here. Y'all know me, I love some soul forward jazz, and this, I think, is some of the best. Each of the pieces on this album, interestingly enough, are actually from a different composer. So you have many of the folks in the lineup who actually contribute. You have one by Irvin, one by Parlan, one by Tucker, one by Green. You also have a piece by Stanley Turrentine, who played with Horace Parlan quite a bit, and then you also have one by the bebop vocalist Babs Gonzalez. So one of the reasons why I love this and I'm ranking it in the sort of the top 5 of the year is because simply it's available. This is one of the sort of first of Parlan's, actually this is the first of Parlan's records in the Tone Pope series, probably because it wasn't in the Music Matters series where some of his others were. But in my opinion, really all of Horace Parlan's work should be made available easily and for an affordable price. And so I love that they included this one. I also love anything Grant Green, and he is highlighted, I think, just really wonderfully on this album. What I would say, though, and I kind of led with this and saying it was soul jazz, is that this is sort of a little bit more of a straightforward, straight ahead soul jazz kind of album, but it's executed just really, really well, where even if there are some simplistic melodies that are represented here, it just turns into really engaging solo work, and I think it transcends a traditional soul jazz album just because of the excellence of each of the musicians on this album. All right, and finally, so the last of my top 5 for 2025, at least for the first half of the year anyway, is Gretchen Moncur III's Some Other Stuff. So this album was put out first in 1965. The lineup includes Cecil McBee, Anthony Williams, Herbie Hancock, and Wayne Shorter. What you'll probably realize is that we've kind of done almost like a sort of represented many styles of Blue Note, and that was unintentionally, but I think it actually is fitting because the 2025 calendar did represent really all of these different styles: the West Coast, the bebop, soul jazz, post-bop and a little bit more avant-garde. It really did cover everything, and I think that's one of the reasons that made the calendar so stellar. Obviously, the entire calendar wasn't going to appeal to everybody, but there was something for everyone. So this album is more challenging and possibly the most challenging, and maybe what I mean by that is most innovative albums of the 2025 Tone Poet calendar. And I think why I like it is because of its complexity and how well that complexity is presented here by Joe Harley, Kevin Gray, and the rest of the Tone Poet crew. So on this album, there is a lot of nuance because the focus is not on loud, beautiful, long tones or snappy melodies and memorable rhythms. Um, so when there is more attention, I think, in the music to nuance, you need more attention to engineering, I think. And so I think that's why this album is a perfect match with sort of what Tone Poet represents. And I really do think that Blue Note knocked it out of the park with this one. So, this album, they're because of the lineup and because they're all kind of improvising, sometimes simultaneously, it feels more of an ensemble performance, and there's individual statements by each musician sort of reacting to the others, and so much artistry to capture, and again, complexity. And so I think for all of those reasons, and probably more, I think this is one of the most surprising choices, I think, for the Tone Poet series, but certainly one of the most rewarding, especially for those of us who are sort of willing to lend an ear to some of the music that was a little bit more innovative at this time. All right, so that's it. Top five. It's possible I left some out that maybe I should have included, but listen, that's part of the process that you go through when you limit yourself to a top five. Not a slight to some of the other releases that I didn't cover. It's just these were the ones that spoke to me. So we'll see what changes. We're only halfway through the year. We have another half of the year to go. Many more exciting titles as well. But let me know what you think, I guess, about my choices, and maybe ones that you thought were some of the most excellent that I didn't cover. Leave me a note in the comments. And yeah, thanks very much for sticking with me as always, and I'll see you next time.